Welcome to another great O'Reilly webcast. Hello everyone, thanks for joining us today. My name is Yasmina Greco. I'm with O'Reilly Media, and I will be your host for today's webcast. Today, folks, we have Darren Jones with us, and he is going to talk to you about Sinatra, Classy Web Development in Ruby. Darren is the author of Jumpstart Sinatra by SitePoint. It's a short book that helps you to get up to speed with Sinatra over a weekend. He's been playing around with programming and building websites for over a decade and using Sinatra since 2009. Darren lives in Manchester, UK, where he teaches math and plays water polo. As we get the webcast started, I'd like to go over a little housekeeping to help you get the most out of today's webcast. First, you'll want to open your group chat widget if you haven't already done so. This is where we can interact with each other during the event and where you can submit your questions for Darren. We find that our audience usually has a lot of good knowledge to share, so we encourage you to chat freely during the event. However, if you have questions for Darren, please preface them with a capital letter Q so we know that they're for him and we can make sure to see it for Q&A. You can also open, move, and resize any of the other widgets. If you would like to tweet from the Twitter widget today, you might need to give it permission to access your account. The Twitter widget will automatically append the event's hashtag to your tweet so you don't have to. And today, folks, our hashtag is Ruby, all one word. If you have any trouble with the webcast, please take a look at your help widget. If you continue to have trouble, just post it in the group chat and one of our staff will help you right away. If you have choppy audio or stalled visuals, please try refreshing your window. And remember, the best thing you can do for a good audio stream is close any apps that could interfere. People always ask, so we'd like you to know we are recording today's webcast and we will have the archive ready usually within 48 hours. And folks, at this time, it is my pleasure to turn the program over to Darren for his presentation. Hello, Darren.
Hi, everyone. Thanks, Yasmina, for that introduction. Glad to see everyone here. And as she said, we're just over on Sinatra Classy Web Development with Ruby. Just to kick things off, I'd like to just run a quick poll just to find out what people's experiences with Ruby. So I'm just going to push that poll out to everyone. The questions there are, have you ever used Ruby before? Maybe you've never used it. You can write a bit of Ruby. Maybe you've used Rails. It'd be good to know if anyone's used Sinatra already. Maybe we've got some experienced Rails developers out there. Or maybe we've got some people who are experienced with Ruby but haven't used it much on the web, for example, Rails or Sinatra. So if people could just get filling that poll in, it'd be good to see the results of that as the answers come in. Okay. Just give a few more seconds to do that. I'm just going to push the results of that poll to everyone so you can see some quite interesting results. Here we go, everyone. So as you can see, mixture of people here. We've got some people have used, a lot of people have used Ruby and Rails, but we also have some people who haven't used any. We've got some people, some lucky people who've already used Sinatra already. And we've got some experienced Rails developers as well on board. So hopefully there'll be something here for everybody. I'm just going to start off by introducing Sinatra and take you through why you might want to use Sinatra. So if we look at the points here, the first point is it's got exposed simplicity, not hidden complexity. This is it's really a nod towards Rails, really. Rails has a lot of magic that happens in the background, where Sinatra, it's all in the foreground. You can see what you're doing, and it tries to keep things simple rather than a lot of magic going on in the background that you don't understand. It's also very flexible. It allows you to do things in lots of different ways. So again, unlike Rails, it's not opinionated. It's really much you can choose how you do things. And it does make building websites as simple as they have to be, but no simpler. So even though it is very simple and easy to use, it's not, there's not things missing. You can do most of the things you can with Sinatra. I like the fact you can get started quickly. As you'll see, we can write files in just a single file, and you can get things up and running as fast as you can. But it also scales well. So you can write modular apps, and you can start breaking things down, and you can write very big applications in Sinatra. Having said that, the actual code base itself is very small. It's only about 2,000 lines of code, so very fast. It's worth going to see the code. You can see it on GitHub. It doesn't take too long to go through the code and see how things work. It's also a good example of some Ruby code as well. It's very fast and very stable as well. I've written lots of things in Sinatra. I've never known them to fail, and it moves along very quickly in their statistics when it's compared to Rails and other frameworks. It does very well. And last of all, but by no means least, it's got a really helpful community. If you go on the Google Groups page, or you go and ask around on the internet, you'll always find some really helpful people, including the maintainer of Sinatra, Constantine Haas. Very nice guy, very quick to help people and help people improve. So if you ever run into a problem, you'll find a nice community with the Sinatra people. So what could it be useful for? Well, Sinatra is really good for actually testing out some ideas. So if you want to get something up and running quickly, then you have an idea, bam, you can get it down, put it into a file, get it running really quickly. It's also good if you want to prototype out a website or an app. Again, the speed helps here. You can start moving very quickly with it. Doesn't mean you have to move on to a bigger framework. You can actually build your web app up using Sinatra and keep going. One thing it's been used for a lot is to create APIs for web services. Another useful aspect of Sinatra is when you already have a Ruby program, is to then put that program on the web. So Sinatra is just basically Ruby. So it's just a case of using the Ruby program you already have and creating a few routes that link your program to some web endpoints. So there's some use cases. All of the things you can think of about putting something on the web would be Sinatra, I'm sure, would be suitable for. So let's start the show. How do you get going with Sinatra? Well, the first thing you need to do is, well, assuming you already have Ruby installed, which I think most of you hopefully have, you need to install the Sinatra gem. That's just a single line, as you can see here, gem, install Sinatra. And once you get Sinatra installed, all you need to do is, as a starter file, is to write require Sinatra. That requires the Sinatra gem. And this little bit of code here, which is called a route handler. We'll be looking at those in a bit more detail in the next slide. But this one is saying when we go to the route /hello, we will see the message hello Sinatra. And if you save that in a file, all you need to do is run that file using the command Ruby followed by the file name, and that will start a server going. As you can see at the bottom, you get a nice little message in a console that says Sinatra has taken to the stage for development, which is saying you're running in development mode. So that would be a very quick example of Sinatra. It just shows that in 4 lines of code, you can get something running, and if you then went into your browser, you would see the message, "Hello, Sinatra." Let's have a look at how route handlers work a little bit more. So we go on to the next slide. You can see the anatomy of a route handler. So a route handler starts off with the HTTP verb that you want to use. In this case, we're using get, which is used when we want to just get pages from the server. And after this comes the actual route as a string. Now, in this case, we're using what's called a named parameter. Now, these have a leading colon. Now, that means someone could write anything inside the route. So I could write /Darren, or I could write /Daz, /Superman, anything I wanted. And that would actually be saved in the params hash as under the key name. And as you can see here, I'm setting the params hash equal to a variable called name. So I'm taking what's entered into the route by the user, and we're saving it as a variable called name. And then the last line of any route handler is what's actually sent to the browser. Now, that's always the case in Sinatra. So in this case, this last line of hello, and then the name, which will then be, we use some string interpolation to insert the name that was entered into the address bar, that will appear as a message in the browser. So that's a basic route handler. I just want to go back to this HTTP verb get. So there are quite a few different ones, and Sinatra supports them all, as we can see here on this next slide. We use get if we just want to show a resource. We're just getting a resource from the server. Often post is used if we want to create something, create a resource. So these are all used in RESTful design patterns. Sinatra also supports the put and patch verbs. They're often used when you want to update something. Patch is very similar to put, except that it's when you only want to update a resource partially. And if you want to delete a resource, then we use a delete route handler. So you've got 5 different types of route handler there, all depending on how the user is interacting with the web page. We'll see some different examples of those later. So I just want to look at views now. Sinatra has a really awesome feature called inline views. Now, this actually allows you to write your views in the same file as the route handlers. So you can actually create an application in just a single file using Sinatra, which I think is really cool. Eventually, it probably your application might get a bit too big for just one file, but when you're starting off, it's really good to be able to write all your code in the same place and keep it all together. So we can see an example here where we have to require Sinatra again. That requires the gem, and we have a similar route handler to before, where we're looking at the route which has a name parameter again called name, and this time we actually set what's called an instance variable equal to the params hash that contains the name that's entered in the address bar. Now, an instance variable always starts with the @ symbol, and these are available inside views. So in the previous example, we just returned a string at the end of the route handler. In this example, we're going to return a view. And the way this works is, if you look at the last line again, we have ERB, which is the name of the templating engine we're going to use. We'll see a bit later that you can use lots of different templating engines, but ERB is included with Ruby, so it's a good one to use. And this is followed by the name of the view to display, which is a Ruby symbol, starts with the colon. The view is called Howdy. Now, if we look down at the bottom of this example, you'll see it says end. This is to say we've reached the end of all the Ruby that we're going to write, so all the route handlers are finished. And after this, we put all our inline views. Now, the names of the views always start with 2 @ symbols. So we can see 2 @ symbols here, followed by the name of the view, which is howdy. And then inside, I can use some HTML, and ARB allows me to place some Ruby inside the HTML. So we put it inside these special tags with a percentage sign. And this is saying evaluate whatever's held in the instance variable name. And if we go back to the route handler, we can see the instance variable name is set to the value of name in the params hash, which actually is taken from the route, which is what the user enters into the address bar. So if I went onto my browser and entered /Darren, this would then be saved in the params hash under name, and I would set an instance variable equal to this. Then the view can access this instance variable, and it creates a message. It's a level 1 heading that says, howdy Darren, and that's what would be actually displayed in the browser. So the way all these all fit together is all quite nice, and you can start to see how everything works. So Sinatra also includes external views, which as we can see here, if you start to find that putting all your views into the same file is a bit much, then you can create a separate views folder and place all the files in there as separate files. That's the views folder by default. Now, I just want to mention layout files. This is a file called layout by default. These can all be changed in Sinatra's configuration, but for the best, stay with these nice defaults. This is a file that's created with every view, and it's shown with every view. So for any view you go to, the layout file will be shown, and it's useful for putting in the sort of standard HTML things, as you can see here, so the doc type and the HTML and body tags. And then this important tag here is the yield tag. That is basically where every view will appear. So in the last example, when I went to the howdy view, then the level 1 heading would appear where it says yield, so in between the 2 body tags. And I should just point out that you can use layout files for inline views as well as external views. Well, in fact, you can mix inline and external views, so you can have some views placed inside a views folder, and you can also put some of your views in the main file that your route handlers are in. So I did mention templating engines before. We'll move on to the next slide and see a list of templating engines that are supported in Sinatra. It basically uses a gem called Tilt. So anything that's available to Tilt is available to Sinatra. And you can see a few examples there. ERB that we just seen, that comes packaged with Ruby. You've got Haml, Slim, which is one I particularly like, Slim. You have to install gems for these if you're going to use them and require them in your file. And Markaby, Builder, Liquid, Markdown is also a very popular one as well. Sticking with route handlers, just going to move on. Sinatra has some special route handlers that you can use, some special helper methods that can be used for some particular routes. So, for example, if there's an error on a page and an error object is created, there's a special route to say if ever an error happens, then we want to display the page using ERB, the page called error. And we can create an instance variable that we can access in the error page. We take that from this request environment variable. That's actually from Rack. Sinatra is built on Rack. Rack is the basis for Sinatra, and this is just taking it from there. So whenever an error happens, it's saved in this hash here, and we can just put this equal to an instance variable called error, and then show an error page that we put in our views folder, and then we could use the error object to inform the user a bit more about the errors. Another common thing that happens is you get pages not found, so you get a 404 error. Sinatra has this nice little helper method here that you can use, where we can specify the page to be shown if a 404 error occurs. So in this case, we're saying use ERB to show a page that's called page missing. So that would be in our views folder as well. Now, next we're going to look at how to use CSS and style in Sinatra. So first of all, you can just use just regular CSS, and that would just be linked to in your layout file. You just have a link to that as usual, like you would in normal HTML. But if you want to be like the cool kids and start to use SAS, SCSS, or less, then well, these are all supported by Coat, and Sinatra makes it really easy to. It just takes one line, as we can see here. It's just a quick route handler. This is saying when the browser actually goes looking for a file called name.css, then actually can we use SCSS to process our SCSS file that's actually, it's called styles, and that gets saved in the views folder. So you can create some SCSS, put it in the views folder, and Sinatra will actually process this for you. You don't have to pre-compile it or anything. It'll all get compiled for you on the fly. It gets cached in production, but in development, it's with every request it gets compiled each time. It's really nice to, with one line, you can start using SAS or any of these different CSS engines. Okay. Talking of that, if you like to use CoffeeScript instead of JavaScript as well, then same thing. It's supported in Tilt, so that means Sinatra supports it as well. And in this case, what we're saying is we just have to add this route handler that says, instead of using my JavaScript file that's mentioned in the HTML, probably in the layout file, then instead we want to use CoffeeScript, so we use this little method here called coffee. And this is going to go looking for a file called application.coffee, which should be in your views folder. Okay, so I've just been talking a lot about views, and I've just seen there's a few questions. I think might be a good point to just answer those questions, actually. Is that okay, Yasmin?
Yes, that's a great idea, Darren. So we'll just let folks know who may have joined us late. Folks, if you do have a question for Darren and what he's talking to you about and showing you, open your group chat widget. It's right there, the little brown widget in your widget tray. Type your question and send it in, and we will take as many as we have time for. Back to you, Darren.
Okay, got a good question from Ito C. Sorry if I've not pronounced that correctly. But the question is there an equivalent for Rails' partials? And the answer is yes, most definitely, actually. And I just want to go back to one of the slides. The way these work are just great in Sinatra. It's just the way you kind of expect them to work. If I just find an example when we're referring to here we go. So if we see here, if you can see that phrase that says ERB howdy. Now ERB is actually just a helper method that Sinatra provides that says use ERB to display this view called howdy. And actually, they don't just have to be used in route handlers. You can just insert them inside another view. So if I wanted to display this view called Howdy inside another view, all I would need is to use, so in ERB, if we can see the percentage sign tags, the special tags, I would just write inside those ERB Howdy. That would create a partial. The Howdy would become a partial. It would just be inserted straight inside another view. So you can basically stack views inside views. The nice thing is Sinatra knows that you've done that, and it won't display the layout twice. So you don't need to write, display layout false or anything. It just knows that you've actually embedded a view inside another view, and it would just do it. So basically, you don't need a separate file called partials. You don't need to use an underscore or anything. You just create whichever views you want, and you can then insert another one inside of that. So that looks really nice. I think it's a nice way that was done, and hopefully that answers the question for PCC. And I've got another question from Brian P., which is, where do ERB files typically reside in the app directory? Well, the default is a folder called views. So all the ERB files would end in the extension .erb, and they would get placed in the views folder. It doesn't have to be called views. Some people like to call it templates or something like that. And you can change that in Sinatra's settings. Personally, I just like to stick to the defaults, and we'll put all of my ERB files in the views directory. Otherwise, if you're using inline views, then they just stay in the, they go in the same file as all the route handlers as well. So hopefully that answers Brian P's question as well. And just like Yasmin said, if there are any more questions and answers, then just questions, I guess. If you've got any questions, just pop them in, and we'll try and I'll try to answer them. Okay, so if we just get back to where we were before. I'll pick up from where we left off. So we just looked at how we can add some style with SCSS and SAS, and how we could add using CoffeeScript. These are just one-line route handlers, really. So I've talked about configuration. Configuration in Sinatra, in fact, a lot of the ways things are set up in Sinatra, it is by a block. So we have this configure block, which uses the keyword configure, and then there's a block afterwards. And we can set up different variables here using this set command. So the way that works is we write set and then a symbol of what we want it to be called. So here I'm making a setting called name, and I'm setting it to be Daz. And in the second setting, I'm actually making a setting called digit, but I'm using a little proc here to create a random number. So this will run and set the digit to be some random number, but we use that bit of code there. So it'd actually be a random digit from 0 to 9. And then once we've created those settings, then we can refer to them in route handlers and views by using the settings object. So if I want to get back to the name that I set, settings.name will produce Daz, and settings.digit will produce whatever that random digit from 0 to 9 was. And I can use those throughout my application. Okay, moving on. Next we're going to look at helpers. So I know Rails provides some helpers. So helper methods. These are basically methods that you want to use in route handlers or views that you can use over and over again. So you basically create some methods to save you having to keep writing them out. So it helps to make things a bit drier. You can put these in line in the same file. Very easy. It's a nice little block method again. So you just write helpers, and then inside that block, you just write all your helper methods, and then they can be used throughout the application. Another way to do it is by using an external file. So then you just create a module in a separate file, which is called, in this case, I've just created a module called My Helpers. You can actually call it anything, and you just put all your helper methods inside that module. And then back in your main file, you have to just register what the name of that module is. So you just have to write helpers is called My Helpers, etc. If you put it in an external file, you would have to require that file as well. But there's two nice ways of doing it. Again, I quite like just using a helpers block. You can actually have as many helpers blocks as you like throughout an application, so you can put them anywhere you like. Although I quite like putting the configuration and the helper methods block near the start of the file. Another nice feature are filters. Again, this is something that Rails has. Rails quite a bit more complex than this. It does more things, really. Quite simple, the ones in Sinatra. Again, it's just using a block. So we have a before block. Now, any code that is placed inside this before block, then this will be run before every request. We can use it to create instance variables as well, and they'll be available in each request, in each route handler. And that's quite useful if we want to set up something to run before every single route. The after block is used, obviously this comes after every request, but it comes before the response. So you can actually use it to modify the response of a route handler slightly. So you could get it to add something on the end or send some extra information. And it also has access to any instance variables that were created either in the before block or in the actual route handlers themselves. Okay, so moving on. This is a big one. Does it support databases? Well, yes, it does. You can have your choice of ORM, which is nice. It doesn't depend on any. If you want to go the NoSQL route, then something like using MongoDB, you could use an ORM such as Mongoid. And here we have some examples of the database connection strings. Usually, to get a database running, it's just one line to set it up, and this just goes in your main file. So if you wanted to use MongoDB, for example, a very good ORM for that is Mongoid, and it's just one line just to say load the Mongoid YAML file where all the settings go, and you can just use the usual default settings file as well. That would be saved in the same folder as your actual application file. If you want to use Data Mapper, then very good database ORM, although not supported at the moment, hopefully going to be replaced soon by Ruby Object Mapper. Then Data Mapper, we can use this to set up. This actually plays quite well with some hosting services because it's saying if there's an environment variable set up on the host, then use that database, or if not, then just use a local SQLite database called development. And that will just create a file called development.db in the root directory. And you can use Active Record. So just to use Active Record, actually once it's been required, then all we need to do is the classes that you create have to inherit from the Active Record base when you're making some models. Or another sort of lightweight option is to use SQL, and it just takes one line where we define the database as being using SQLite. So You can use, I mean, there are lots of others as well. Pretty much any database that has a Ruby ORM can be put together and used with Sinatra. So, we've got tests as well. If you want to use tests, obviously tests are very good practice. And again, they work well with Sinatra. You can use RSpec mini test, which comes packaged with Ruby, or Capybara as well. Like I said with the databases, any other Ruby testing framework. Sinatra is just Ruby at the end of the day, and that means that you can use pretty much any testing framework that's made for Ruby can be used in Sinatra. I've just put an example up here of how to run a test in Sinatra. It uses Minitest. Just a few pointers really. You just set up this file, perhaps call it test.rb. It has to require the main file, which is where your actual Sinatra app is. You also have to require test unit, and it also depends on Rack test, so we can test some of the web things themselves. And really then, we just create a class and name it some sort of test name, and that has to inherit from test unit test case. And then we have to include the Rack test methods module. Apart from that, we need to then define our app as the Sinatra application, because we could refer to the app then from then on. And it's just a case of writing out some tests. So you can see here, there's a quick test to say that when you go to the root route, then using a GET request, then we just want to check if the response is okay, and we want to check that what was returned was hello in the body. That's just a very basic test, so we're testing actually how Sinatra works there. You can also include your tests for your actual Ruby code as well, or you can have separate files for different tests. But this is testing that everything's working in the routing part of things. Sinatra is also includes a facility to write extensions, and these are good if you create some Sinatra code that you want to reuse. You can package it up in an extension, keep it in a separate file, and they can be used over and over again. They can even be packaged up as a gem, and in fact there are some gems available that are Sinatra specific that can then be used in Sinatra. So if we have a look here, all we need to do to create an extension, very straightforward. They're basically stored in a folder called Sinatra, and they're namespaced in a Sinatra module. That's to keep them all together. And all you need to do here is create a module, give it your own name that's inside the Sinatra module, and then you just have to put this little bit of code that you see here, which is a method where we register the app. So all the route handlers go inside that method after that. And we have to, instead of just writing get followed by the route, we have to write app.get. So they all become methods of the app. And as long as they stay inside that registered method there, then that will create its own self-contained extension that can then be brought in to another application, and those routes will be made available to you. Now, talking about extensibility, about how we can make things bigger, then there's the modular style of application. Now, this lets you start to break up your application into reusable modules. It's also good if you're working in teams where people can work on things separately. Because the global namespace isn't polluted, because we use separate classes here. These can also then be packaged up and used as middleware as well. And generally, this is what people start to move on as they start to make bigger applications. Excuse me. There's a few things to point out in a modular style application, which is a bit different from the ones we've been looking at. They're called classical style applications, which are usually the type of applications you see in tutorials and certainly any beginners tutorials about Sinatra. First thing is, instead of require Sinatra, we only actually require Sinatra base. There's some things we don't actually need from the whole Sinatra code base, and this is what actually signals for it to be that it's a modular style application we'll be using. And then the main difference is that all of the route handlers are then placed inside a class. So just like before, except we enclose them all inside a class that inherits from Sinatra base. For example, in this example here, we've got my app, which inherits from Sinatra base. And then from then on, I just place all my route handlers inside there. And then right at the end of the class, we actually have to explicitly start the application, start the server going. So that's done automatically if you're using the classical style. In this case, we just have to start the server explicitly using the run method. And we've just got a little if condition there, which is just to check that the file was actually run directly, so it's not being used in a test or anything, because we don't want to start the server if you're actually just using the file as part of the test. Once again, just stress that Sinatra is just Ruby, and there are lots of gems available for extending its functionality. So you don't want to reinvent the wheel all the time. And there are some things missing. It's not, it doesn't do everything that Rails does, but it also means that it's a lot lighter. You can just pick and choose the gems that you actually need for the project you're using. So here's a few examples of ones I found quite useful. Sinatra doesn't have a built-in Flash that Rails has, but there's a nice gem called Sinatra Flash. It's actually written as an extension that we just looked at earlier. That can include and give you the functionality that you get inside Rails. Sinatra Contrib is a nice gem that has lots of different useful extras. There were some things that used to be in Sinatra core that have been taken out and put into this gem. So nice little extras. One of my favorites is a reloader. So this, when you're working in development mode and you make a change to your application, it automatically feeds those changes in without having to restart the server. So that makes things a bit easier. So the Sinatra Contrib gem is worth looking at for some nice little extras. And if you're looking for email in your application, then it's definitely worth looking at the Pony gem. And it's got some simple email, and obviously, a lot of applications don't need access to email, but Pony makes it very easy to do some simple email sending. And once you've built a Sinatra application, then it's time for it to go live. That's what we're just going to look at next. There's a number of options for doing this. It was originally it was quite hard to actually get Sinatra applications live and deploy them. I'd still say Heroku is probably the best way of deploying a Sinatra application. It still has free accounts. A lot of the people who worked on Sinatra initially work at Heroku, so it's got very, very good Sinatra support. OpenShift is a nice option from Red Hat as well, works in a very similar way to Heroku and has good support for Sinatra. There are lots of other solutions using Amazon's web service, where the servers are set up already for you to deploy a Sinatra application. Or you can use Passenger, then deploy that yourself, either on your own server or using a host. So the options are actually pretty good for Sinatra now, deploying any Sinatra applications. And that brings me to the end of the presentation. I'd just like to say thanks for tuning in, and I hope you've enjoyed the show. I know there are questions. If you do have questions, I'm more than willing to answer them. I know people do because I can see them in the window here. So I'm just going to have a quick couple of minutes to have a go through them, and then I will do my best to answer them. But please, if you've got some other questions or any comments, fire away.
All right, just use me here. I just want to let folks know, folks, as you heard, we are at the Q&A portion now. Please open that group chat widget, type your question in, send it in, and we'll take as many as we have time for. All right, Darren, we'll turn it back to you.
Okay, thanks for that, Yasmina. First question I've seen here is from Raina R. Is there something like scaffolding? And does Sinatra, can you develop according to MVC? One of the things I said right at the start was Sinatra is just ultra flexible. You can do things your way. But MVC is perfectly possible. It's just one of the design patterns you may want to use. Sinatra doesn't stop you, but Sinatra makes it a lot harder to do that. So you've got to know about MVC. You can certainly set up a models. We've looked at views, and controllers are really like your route handlers. So it's certainly possible to do MVC with Sinatra. It doesn't include any scaffolding, although there are some gems I think you can look at that will create some scaffolding for you. There are certainly some that will create some RESTful interfaces for you. Probably not quite the same as Rails' scaffolding, but you'd have to use an external gem if you wanted to do scaffolding just like that. So that's that one. Okay. Got here from Mohammed Maksuda, how is Padrino as compared to Sinatra? So Padrino is a framework that's built on top of Sinatra, and actually this follows on really well from the last question. Padrino tries to add in a lot of modules that people feel that are often needed and Sinatra doesn't do for you. So it does follow an MVC architecture. It does provide email for you. It provides a flash, and it provides it does provide a kind of scaffolding framework for you. So Padrino really gives you, some fast app development, but it's still a lot lighter than Rails, and you can use you can just pick and choose which modules you use, and it's actually quite separate. That you can actually use some of Padrino's modules just on their own without Padrino. You can just pull them into your own Sinatra app. So Padrino is somewhere between Sinatra and Rails. It's built on top of Sinatra. It makes it a lot more like Rails, but not completely. Still a lot lighter. Definitely worth looking at. Does make building apps a lot quicker. Another question from Guy S. What about support for Dart? So Dart is Google's JavaScript sort of compile in project. I have to be honest there with you, Guy. I'm not quite sure. Like I said before, it'd be to do with whether Tilt supports Dart. So I'm just going to try and have a quick look for you on that, and I will get back to you on that. Okay, let's have another question. This one is from Brian P. How about scaling? Does Sinatra handle projects larger than just prototyping? Are there any examples? Yes, Sinatra definitely scales. I actually did an article about scaling Sinatra, how you can work through different sizes of this. It was published on SitePoint. But it will definitely scale. I think you probably start off maybe with a small prototype, and you can gradually build outwards, and you can start in a views folder. Then you can start separating your models into different files. You can start having separate tests. And then you maybe start changing, using the modular style and start having different modules that do different things, and gradually you build up this whole application. And the way I like that way of working is because you have seen the application develop from the start, rather than starting with this big monolithic application at the beginning that didn't do very much. It's built up with you, and you know how everything fits together. So definitely does. There are quite a few examples knocking around. Quite a lot of them are on GitHub. I know the Gauges app was written in Sinatra. I don't think that is available on GitHub, but what is the Travis continuous integration application is available on GitHub, and that is a big Sinatra application, and it's written by Konstantin Haas, who's the maintainer of Sinatra. So, lots of good examples on there, actually, of how to put a big Sinatra application together. Okay, on to another question. There's one from Eric M. He says, can you discuss user state data like Rails' session feature? Yes, Sinatra does support sessions. Sorry, that probably should have been a slide, actually. I have to update this presentation. Works very much the same, actually, a bit like the params hash. You literally just start by, you refer to a session hash, and you can put things equal to it. If you want to store data from one request to the next, then you would use the session hash to do that, to store information, and then it can be used again. So it works a bit like the params hash, but you're actually putting data in there. It's almost the same as the way Rails works, and that is covered in the book as well. We use it to do authentication in the book. Just checking if there are any other questions. Yes. Okay. Okay, keep working through these. This one is from Dan M. Is there something to enable secure logins to the site? It's a tough one, authentication. Like I just said, it's covered in the book that I wrote, but not particularly secure, to be honest. It wouldn't be something you want to use in production. There are gems available for that. It's not covered in Sinatra Core. You'd want to use a gem, but pretty similar to the gems that are used in Rails, like Devise and Warden. Usually for anything like this, when you want secure login, you'd want to use a gem that's been proven really, rather than loading your own sort of solution. Okay, question from John B. How about deploying Sinatra using JRuby? Not something I've tried, but I think something perfectly possible. There's been a lot of development in the JRuby world, and I'm fairly certain that on Heroku they support JRuby, so that would be something to, if you looked at Heroku's docs, I think it wouldn't be too hard to deploy that using JRuby. It's definitely something that is supported. A question from Vanille S. What does the second file of a multiple file app look like? Well, generally, when you start breaking off into multiple files, you can choose what goes in each file. You might want to put tests in a separate file. You might want to keep your models in one file and your route handlers in another. Or you might want to separate them by class. So, for example, you might have a controller class that just looks at the routes with all the route handlers, and you might have separate classes for different models that you have. They do all need bringing together when they're run, and that's usually done in a rackup file. But generally, each file, we can require them and talk to each other, and we can put them together. Again, at the end of the book, in the last chapter, we go over putting together a modular website and how the different files work together. But you can choose what goes in each file yourself. There isn't any set way of doing things. This is one of the nice things about Sinatra, that it has no set way of doing things, so you can do things your way. Sometimes people, you want to be told a little bit, you know, and with all that power comes great responsibility. You've got to be careful about how you do things. There is a chance you could just completely mess things up and get in a big mess. So it's sometimes good to follow some guides and tutorials, see how people do it, look at examples on the internet. Okay, another question is from Taito C. What would you say are the key elements to decide to use Sinatra against Ruby and vice versa? I don't think it's one against the other. I'd say, I mean, Sinatra is written in Ruby, and really Sinatra is just a domain-specific language, a DSL, for making Ruby programs go on the net. So, for example, Ruby, you just use a Ruby program, it wouldn't go completely on the internet. You could do it, but it'd take a lot of code. Sinatra takes the pain out of making responding to HTTP requests. It uses a lot of Rack as well. But Sinatra is basically used to get Ruby onto the internet and to make web apps out of Ruby programs. So really, I'd say as soon as you want to get something into a web app, you'd start using Sinatra. Until then, you could write things in Ruby. And Sinatra makes it quite easy to transition from a Ruby app into using Sinatra for the web. A question from Raina R. Can you use all the common IDEs for Sinatra? Yeah, as far as I can know, I mean, again, it nearly all is just Ruby. So it's just using blocks and method definitions. So any IDE that supported Ruby would support Sinatra. Because there's no particular file structure or anything, you don't need it set up to run anything like that. Personally, I just use a text editor with some syntax highlighting. Next question is from David L. How do you pass instance variables besides params to a route, like an object created from a class besides your app class? I just might want that just clarifying just a little bit, David. So instance variables can be passed to a view from a route handler. You can just, if you make any instance variable equal to that, then it will be available in all the views. But perhaps if you could just elaborate on the question a little about what you're actually looking to do, hopefully I'll be able to answer that. And, well, okay, I'll just move on to a few more questions. Hopefully, David L., you could just change that question. That would be great. Just add a new question if you can't edit it. Next question is from David P. What are the minimum programming skills that I need to use Sinatra? Surprisingly little, actually. But basically, the better you are at Ruby, the better you will be at Sinatra. So grabbing a good book about Ruby would be useful. I'd say the book I wrote, you can get by, and it tries to build in a bit of Ruby as well, but it doesn't really teach you Ruby. You know, you can make Sinatra apps and not always know exactly what's going on, but the more you know about Ruby, the better it is. I mean, I still get, as I develop my Ruby knowledge, then I find myself understanding more and more about how Sinatra works. But they both work in tandem very well. I think as you get better at Sinatra, it makes your Ruby better as you see more and more examples in Sinatra, because a lot of certainly the Sinatra code base is a beautiful example of Ruby. And as you develop your Ruby more, your Sinatra gets better. Another question from David P. Is HTML, CSS, JavaScript, and Ruby, is it enough? Good question. To be honest, yeah, you probably need to have some HTML and CSS knowledge to write a Sinatra app because it's going to be a web app, so you need to use those. You don't need JavaScript. You can get away with just HTML and CSS. To be honest, just HTML really, but it's going to be a plain-looking site. I mean, I think that would be a great starting point, and I think you can make some web apps. Certainly, it's what I've built web apps with just that knowledge base. To be honest, for years my JavaScript wasn't very good. So yeah, I'd learn those bit by bit. You don't need to be a whiz at HTML or CSS. You can just have the basics and just build on them. You know, everything that you learn as you do more of all of them together. But added to that, it's always worth learning more things. Like I said, I've been working on JavaScript loads over the last few years, and next one on the list is Node.js, and there's just more coming all the time. But yes, you could get by with those. Okay, I think I've covered those. It'd be nice if David L. Would just elaborate on that. I was just waiting on that, and I was just trying to find out if Dart is covered in Tilt. Apart from that, I think everything has been answered there. There's one last thing people have said about MVC. I forgot to say in the URL section here, in the resources, you can see on my GitHub profile, there is an example of an MVC program, although it's actually all just in one file, but you can see it's broken down as models, views, and controllers in separate sections. It's a little note-taking app, very basic, but you can see that it's worth looking at how that works, and very helpful to see some examples of how that works. It uses Mongoid to store the notes. So I'm just looking for Dart. It's very hard to find out because of the name's so common, and Tilt as well. I just think that's something. This seems to be a Rails Dart modular. It does seem to use Tilt, so yeah, it does seem that Tilt does include Dart processing. So yeah, I think you can use Dart in Sinatra apps. Just going back to David L's question about how to pass with instance variables. One other thing with the params hash is you can get items in the params hash by putting them into the URL. The other way is via a form. I don't know if that's what you were asking, David, but if people enter things in a form, then those values from the form are also placed inside the params hash as well. Okay, we don't seem to have any new questions. I don't know if we do, Yasmin, if you can see.
All right. Just taking a peek here. It looks like we are over the top of the hour, so there are some additional questions that have come in. Darren, I'm pushing out your Twitter handle so folks can follow up with you on Twitter.
Yep, definitely.
Yes, so I'm pushing out one more time to you all. Follow up with Darren on Twitter. Continue the conversation. Perfect. Okay, there. So with that, we are going to say, Darren, a really big thank you to you for spending your time with us today and for sharing all your knowledge and expertise.
Yeah, I'd just like to say thanks. Thanks for everyone for checking in and giving me your time. Seeing all the big list of people, it's really great to see and inspiring, really, and humbling to see so many people. And I just hope it's been useful and people have learned something.
Excellent. And folks, I want to let you all know before you leave, if you didn't open the group chat, please open it. I pushed out some information to you all in the chat. It's a code and a URL to save you some money today on his book as a thank you for attending the webcast. So O'Reilly Media has his book. It's called Jumpstart Sinatra, the ebook. You can get the ebook today for 50% off as a thank you for attending. So if you like what Darren's been talking to you about and showing you, the book has a lot more in there that can really help you with your day-to-day. So do take advantage of the really great price it's at today. And everyone that attended, thank you so much for spending your time with us. I know we had people from all over the world today, so we thank you for those of you that got up early or had to stay up late, and we hope you benefited from the webcast. Folks, this will conclude today's webcast. Goodbye, everyone.
Thank you. Bye-bye.